네, 구독자 여러분 안녕하세요. 제가 오늘도 굉장히 특별한 게스트를 모셨습니다. 제가 게스트를 모실 때마다 항상 바쁘신 분이라고 말씀을 하지만 정말 오늘 모신 게스트만큼은 말 그대로 너무 바쁘셔가지고 지금까지 못 모셨습니다. 그런데 오늘 드디어 이렇게 약속을 잡고 모시게 됐습니다. Professor Atkinson, could you briefly introduce yourself to subscribers?
Hello, my name is Timothy Atkinson, and I've been living in Korea for about 45 years, and have been teaching at Seoul University of Foreign Studies for the past 20 years. My studies at Berkeley were in Korean history, and part of that program included classical Chinese, which you call Hanmun. So I got started in Hanmun back in those days. That would have been about 1978, 1979. And then I graduated from Berkeley in 1981 and returned to Korea, and I've been here ever since. And I've been translating freelance since the late 1990s. So.
티모시 교수님은 지금 현재 서울외대통번역대학원 대학교에서 한영 번역을 한국 학생들에게 영어로 가르치는 일을 하고 계십니다. 좀 복잡하죠? 외국인이 한국어 텍스트를 영어로 한국인에게 어떻게 하면 그것을 영어로 번역할 수 있는지를 가르치는 거죠. So could you tell me briefly about what you actually do in Korea as a translator?
Well, as a translator, I always translate Korean to English because my native language is English, and it's a lot easier to go into your native language than it is to go out of your native language. I have been doing this work for almost 40 years, so I know the way to do it quite well, and I know a lot of different topics, including industries and companies, but also Korean history. And as a part of my major, I studied classical Chinese for 3 years, and that's been very, very helpful for me to learn Korean and to understand Korean, because probably 70% of the Korean vocabulary stems from Chinese characters. So if you understand the basic characters, you can guess or figure out new words that you've never seen before. That's a big bonus, a big help. So the characters matter a lot, and I've made my own glossaries, many glossaries, not only Hanja glossaries, but also Korean to English glossaries for so many different industries. But I have almost 40 different glossaries on my computer.
Really?
Yeah.
So Professor Atkinson, what made you first become interested in translation?
Well, it's a matter of economics, I guess.
Yes.
At UC Berkeley, I learned the grammar, and I learned the structure of Korean pretty well, and I learned quite a lot about classical Chinese and Chinese characters. Over here in Korea, my first job was teaching English to employees at Samsung. So that was fine for a while, but I realized that teaching English as a foreigner in Korea has a limited growth potential.
Yes.
But translating Korean to English, especially when I started doing it in the late 1980s, nobody was doing it. Nobody was doing it. Koreans weren't doing it very well, and non-Koreans weren't doing it at all. So it was a matter of a good opportunity to stay here long term. But I also think that money is not enough. If you think you want to be a translator, you have to be motivated by more than just a paycheck. So I always felt that I had a challenge between myself and the text I was working on. So I was always trying to figure out the way to get it into English, and when it was translated properly, I felt a great deal of satisfaction from that. So I have to say that money alone is not enough.
Sir, you translated a lot of Korean documents, especially traditional documents and historic documents. Would you show our subscribers what translations you have done so far?
Some of the more visible things I've done, I've worked with the 중앙박물관 for 20 years, and I've done their magazine. I've done part of their magazine for many years, and I've also worked with Seoul Museum. So and they've done a lot of research projects. They do every year. They do a research project, and then they have to put it in English. It was so I've done work with it every year, a different kind of project, like Shincheon and Myeongdong and Namdaemun Market, Bukchon. So every year they have a different part of Seoul and they talk about it. And these are pretty extensive research projects that I've been doing. Bukchon. And sometimes the National Museum asked me to do some works on certain themes, like lacquerware or furniture, something like that. So I've done some work on that. You know what Weigui is? You know the records of the Joseon period. I did a pretty good book on that a while back. And then in the more academics one, I've done some projects. This one was printed in the University of Hawaii, but we did it from Seoul. This one was produced by Seoul University, and this is history. This is Neo-Confucian history from Joseon period. So yeah, those were originally in Hanmun, not in Korean. And when you're doing Hanmun to English, many people try to translate the Hangul version of the text into English, and I think that's a bad idea. I think the Hangul translations are helpful, but they're not enough. And if you're going to go from Hanmun to English, you need to be able to read the Hanmun.
So when you translate Hanmun into Korean, it's sometimes even difficult for even Koreans to understand a lot of the Hanjas or Hanmun.
Yeah.
And as a foreigner, how do you understand all those different?
Well, I mean, everybody tells me, how many characters do you know? And that's really a stupid question, because if I can tell you how many I know, I don't know very many. That's like me asking you, how many English words do you know? Does that make sense? So the first 400 or 500 characters are probably the most difficult ones, because you don't know how to learn them yet. But once you get over 1,000 characters, your mind will start to organize them a little better, and that's probably the way to go with it. Again, with the Hanja, I have made a very extensive glossary on my computer that I use all the time.
Yes.
So by referring to those glossaries that I have, that's how I can remember things.
I think that you made a very good point. Personally, I studied Latin words and Greek words, basic root words. I can say with confidence that once you learn and once you understand what the Latin words and Greek words have affected the modern English lexicon or vocabulary, then you can broaden your understanding about English.
Right.
And I think this is the case for a foreigner like you, working as a translator who translates Korean text into English. What do you think about this?
Well, that's absolutely right, because the Hanja themselves are so many characters with the same pronunciation and the same spelling in Hangul. So in some cases, the context will be clear about the meaning, but not always. And so if you don't know the character for the specific context, sometimes you just have to guess it.
Yeah.
And this is especially true with technology, medicine, certainly with things that have to do with Korean history and art. So in those cases, if you don't know the characters, I think it's very difficult to even guess what the word might be. I catch my students all the time on that. I ask them, well, what's the Hanja for that? They don't know. So then I said, well, how do you know what the meaning is? And, well, we just kind of guess.
There's an English word, circumstance. It can be translated either into 환경 or 주변. But the circum means surrounding in Greek in ancient Greek language, and 환경 also means 환 also means 고리.
Yeah, circle or
So
surrounding.
it's interesting to know that the ancient people, whether they were Asian or Western, they had similar idea when it comes to conceptualizing something vague, as we can see in this case, circumstances and 환경.
I mean, Huan means circle, it also means surrounding. And Hwangyang means surroundings, as far as I know. And Gyeong actually means something like the area where you're at. So just a couple of days ago in class, we had the word Hyeon-an.
형안.
Hyeon-an. And nobody got it, even though this is a modern Korean word, but it means a pending issue. But they didn't know what hyun meant. They all thought that it meant modern, like hyundae.
현대.
But it isn't.
No.
Hyun means to hang or suspend, hanging down.
Yes.
And so hyun-an means something, an is like a proposal. So a hyun-an would be a hanging proposal, which of course in more smooth English would be pending issue, you see.
That's a very good point. In Busan, where I was born, there's Gwangan Bridge. This is 현수교,
Yeah,
which
right.
is suspension bridge.
Yeah, of course.
현 means
Same hyun.
yes.
So it means
Hang.
hanging. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yes. Of all those translated documents, what translation was most meaningful to you?
Well, I can't really identify one specific one, but I can say maybe the most memorable ones. One of them was the first job I ever did for pay, Samsung Life Insurance. And it had a lot of technical words about insurance. It also had legal words in it.
Yes, and financial terms as well.
Financial terms, and insurance is a kind of finance. So when it comes to Hanmun translations, I've done the Shillok and Pangesurok, which I just showed you, for example, on Bukhagwi, which is another text from the 17th century in Korea. So those were very, very interesting and challenging. However, my hobby has been classical Chinese for 30 years. I've been reading English translations, good English translations of many classical texts from China. And then what I do is I take the classical Chinese script, the original text from the internet, and put it on my computer, and then I match the language of from the translated text, line by line, sentence by sentence. And I've been doing that for decades. And I have over 15,000 pages of that stuff on my computer. And it's really helpful. So, you know, that's not something you do in a day or a week. That's years, you know, years and years. But
Sure.
again, I do that because it's fun, kind of interesting and fun for me. Don't forget, the Chinese influence on the Korean language is very big, of course. But the Korean people, of course, have managed to keep a distinctive identity, and that's very important too. I don't want to give the wrong impression. In fact, Korean pronunciation of Chinese characters is more original than the modern Chinese
Really?
is. Yeah.
So, Professor Atkinson, what tips would you like to give Korean students who want to become professional translator like you?
You have to get feedback. You know, after you translate, you have to get somebody to help you to clarify and correct things that are wrong. Even people who are quite good from Korean to English, if the material they're working on is important, they always get a native speaker to correct it, to check it, make sure it's right. And that's normal, okay? But if you're trying to learn, I mentioned earlier, I think making glossaries helps a lot. But if you're going from Korean to English, then your glossary has to also go from Korean to English, not English to Korean. But another thing that I tell my students all the time is that the Korean text, Korean sentences are complex by nature. Korean structure is very complex, and the difference between a sentence and a paragraph is not that clear in Korean. Korean sentences are often actually paragraphs in English. So you have to identify where to shorten the text, shorten the translation, and start over. Shorter sentences and understand the order. And also, because Korean is so long, the structures are so long, they have a tendency to repeat a lot. So there's a lot of repetition and redundancy in the Korean that you have to be aware of and try to not do that in English.
So would you say that when it comes to translation, the shorter is always the better?
Well, I guess you can never say always, but usually. I would say, first of all, when you're trying to select the proper phrase or wording for any specific context, the shorter one is what I would recommend first. But if you've used the shorter one already, then you have to use a little bit different phrasing. One of the things that we English speakers don't tolerate is a lot of repetition. We don't like to see the same phrase 3, 4, 5 times in one paragraph, but in Korean it's no problem to do so.
If you want to improve our writing styles, whether in English or in Korean, what tips would you like to?
Well, I don't know. I think, again, you need a lot of feedback, but no question, the Korean to English has to be shorter. And another thing I find with the Korean is that the way you organize time is a little confusing sometimes. So English is much simpler. You start with the past, go to the present, and then to the future. Past, present, future. In that's how you present the information. But in Korean, you may start in the present, then go to the past, then to the future, and then back to the present. The Korean jumps around quite a lot. And that's not a good look in English to do that way.
Yes.
One thing also that I would mention, and I tell it to my students all the time, is don't start the beginning of your English sentence with a long clause, comma, subject, blah, 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 comma, subject. It's easy to do. In Korean, looks like that, but it's better if you can move the main subject to the front. Most of the time.
A lot of people these days, even my family, say things like this: "Your job is doomed."
Yeah.
In the age of AI translation tools.
Yeah. 15 years ago, I was reading the same predictions. Your job is doomed. Translation is the days are numbered. This latest one, what is it?
DeepL?
The one.
The Chat GTP?
Yeah, Chat.
Chat
Chat.
GTP. And GTP4.
Yeah. Frankly, I don't use any of those things, but I know my students do. They try to do their homework that way. These, we still have to wait and see how sophisticated they become. But
You don't feel threatened at all?
I would never say at all. I mean, it's the world is changing, and the speed of change is accelerating. So I cannot say what's going to be like in 5 years. But until now, it's not. It's not a replacement until now. And if you're doing routine materials like law or contracts or some kind of formal kind of writing, that one will be much more easily done by computer, I think. But literature is not there, not even close.
So Professor Atkinson, it's time to wrap up. Would you like to give the final message to the subscribers on my YouTube channel?
Well, it would be fun to get to meet some of them if they have questions. How big is this community in any case, the Korean translation community? What do you think? How many people are there? 10,000?
We don't have official statistics for that, but I'm not sure. It must be in the tens of thousands.
Yeah, right. Right, and of course there are many kinds of translators. They're not all doing the same kind of job. But yeah, well, that's, in any case, we all share certain kinds of interests, don't we?
Yes.
One thing's for sure, if we don't like doing this job, don't even try. It's too hard.
How about question? Can I ask questions about the AI translation tool?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, it has all of us wondering if we're going to even have a job in 5 years or 10 years. AI is the way we have to wait and see. Until now, it's not going to replace us.
I'll ask a question. Answer. there are a lot of AI tools, AI translators.
Well,
do you think they threaten?
I don't know. I mean, when you say AI, I'm not quite sure because there are many different kinds of computer programs. Sometimes it's the computer does all of the translation for you, like Google Translate or something. And in other cases, it's an assisted.